All right, and welcome back to another episode of Butler's Babble, where we aim to empower, motivate, and inspire you. And today is no different than any other day. We have a great guest on here that you're going to love to listen to. She's into social work, but she's also going to talk about some stuff that she went through in her days growing up in high school and college. And we met years ago, and she's become a really close friend of mine. And I was actually a guest on her podcast, which was a lot of fun. And so now we're just reciprocating. We're getting her on here. So I think you're going to love to listen to what she has to say. But just before we go on, just remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't be afraid to go down and hit subscribe on the channel there and hit that bell there, so you know when we have all these other episodes coming up, because you don't want to miss any of them. And if you're listening to this to the audio version on Spotify or Google Podcasts or wherever you're listening to in your car, don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button on there too, and tell all your friends about Butler's Babble so you can all come and listen to these. So today's guest, we have Dani Frank with us all the way from North Carolina. And Dani, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. I'm so excited to be here. We've been talking about recording this episode for a long time, and I'm really excited to sit down with you and record it today and share a little bit more about my story.
Definitely. I know we had this planned a couple times. We had to cancel a couple times, but I'm glad we finally were able to piece it together. And I'm looking forward to this. So for the people who don't know you, why don't you give them a little background about little Dani growing up in North Carolina? Tell them a little bit about your whole childhood there.
Yes, yes. So I'm actually a Georgia native. I grew up in Atlanta and moved around a bit for college and stuff like that. I went to undergrad in Kennesaw, Georgia, and grad school in IUGA, the University of Georgia. Now, growing up, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She mainly raised us. With the help of a couple babysitters who, when I'm still in contact with today, it's nice seeing her on Facebook and stuff like that. Um, but me, so I should say I have three siblings. We all have D names. My grandfather who has passed away, his name was Denny, and so we were all named after him. And my parents had four kids in 5 years, so it was a crazy, wild, hectic environment. I'm the second oldest, and I kind of took on the role of like caretaker for me and my siblings, really just trying to make sure everyone was okay. Another thing to note about me is my dad is highly successful. And so we all kind of strove for success in school and in our own sports. So, me particularly, I was a competitive gymnast until I was in second grade. And then I picked up tennis and, consistently, playing tennis, doing gymnastics, really like training, very, very intensive. My other siblings played, baseball, football, tennis, wrestling, all sorts of different sports. But it was just, I remember my childhood being a lot of fun. I remember having really good friends in elementary school. I remember growing up close to my cousins. My whole dad's side of the family lives in Georgia. So we grew up all really close to each other and just had a lot of fun. Life was good. It was easy. It was definitely hectic at times. But I think at that age, you know, it's hard to understand, the big scary world. We played a lot outside. My younger brother had a really good set of friends in the neighborhood, and I would tag along with them, and we would go ride our bikes to this mud pit that we called the ditch. And just really had a good time. And um yeah.
And it's funny because you and I have been talking for like 6 months now, I guess it is. And it's funny some of the things you were saying there, because it shows how much you and I are alike, and we didn't even realize it, because you said you have three siblings. I have three siblings. You're the second oldest. I'm the second oldest. You played
Wow.
tennis when you were younger. My brothers and I used to play tennis all the time. So it's kind of funny how much alike we are, and we didn't
Yeah.
even realize it. So
I
maybe
know,
that's
that's
why we're
so
like kindred
cool.
spirits or something. That's why we get along so well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's super cool.
Exactly. So were you very athletic as a kid? Were you more of like a bookworm or introvert, like to be inside, or?
I think as a kid, I think I was more extroverted. And I think my extrovert side is coming out a lot more now. I used to think I was more of an introvert. But I think honestly that was just depression. But yeah, as a kid, I was very athletic. I think I started gymnastics when I was 2 or 3 years old, and I loved it, especially at first. But then it just became I don't even remember how much I wanna say I was in the gym, like, 6 days a week for several hours a day, and I was, like, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I was I the story of how I got out of it is kind of funny. I really wanted to quit, but I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And so I was tumbling one day. I did a round off back handspring or something, and I fell on my arm and I played it off that I broke my arm.
Mm,
And they actually like took me to the hospital, gave me a cast. I mean, it was not broken. And then when it was, healed up, it was time to go back to gymnastics. And I was finally like, oh, I don't want to go back. But I felt like, I mean, from an early age, like the strive for success was on, and I did not want to disappoint my parents. It was, my happiness did not come first. It was, keeping a smile on my parents' face at all costs.
yeah. And was that more self-inflicted, that wanting to help be that like that for your parents, or was it pushed on you a lot?
I think, the more I think about it and the more I reflect on it, I think it was self-inflicted. I saw how successful my dad was, and I thought that, was the only way that my parents would love me too. And I thought this for, I mean, years and years and years. This is, kind of a new thing that, that not that I don't care what my parents think, but
Yep.
more that I'm like living my life for myself and my happiness and not my parents' happiness. But I would say if you were to ask me 5 years ago, I would definitely blame that on my parents. But I definitely think, looking back, I do think I was the one that implicated that and put that pressure on myself.
Mhm, yeah, because I think for the most part, most parents, they just want what's best for their child, and that when you're young, they think, of course, they know what's best. I know with my daughters growing
Hmm.
up, I'm like, "Well, you're doing it because I said so, because I know what's better for you, because you're too young to know." And that's just a parent mentality, and, so I think like you said, growing up, you thought, okay, my parents are making me do this, they're making that, and I have to keep them happy and stuff. But now, when you retrospect back, and that's a good retrospect to do at your age, because most people don't get that until they're in their late 30s or 40s, that they start thinking back, you know what, maybe I was too hard on them. You're realizing that now, which is kind of nice.
Hmm.
Are you and your siblings still close?
Yeah, so I was always closest with my younger brother growing up. I've gotten a lot closer to my older brother over the years. My younger sister, she is in Maryland right now, and she's been off at college for the past several years. So we're not quite as close, but I'd say I'm closest to my brothers right now, but it's kind of like changed over the years. There's points in my life where I've been closer to one sibling or another, but we all talk, very relatively frequently.
Mhm.
Some siblings more than others, but we definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, no, it's hard as you get older because we all move on to our own places. I live 5 hours away from where I grew up in the Toronto area, and my brothers and my mom all live back in that area. So it's hard to see each other. So we actually have a WhatsApp group in there, just the Butler clan, basically. And we just all keep in
Oh,
touch that way, which is good. At least we can still keep in touch with each other, which is nice. And my nephews are in there and my sister in laws and all that stuff. So we're all able, okay. So it's
yeah.
nice that you can stay close like that. So growing up in school, then you get into school, and how was the first years of school with you? Was it easy? Was it were you the type that was easy to find friends and make friends, or was it difficult for you?
So I remember like elementary school, I made friends super easily. I was friends with everyone, that kind of thing. I was in a Girl Scout troop and had tons of friends from that. And then for some reason, I switched to a different Girl Scout troop and made even more friends. And I remember just being friends with some of the guys and goofing around. I was definitely like a jokester. Apparently, there's this one story of me like squirting a glue bottle on the ceiling. I don't remember it, but my friends like tell the story from like fourth grade. Um, but the academic side was extremely, extremely challenging. I've always been good at math. Math was never a struggle for me, but I really struggled with reading. I remember they would separate us into like reading level groups, and I would be in like the lowest level reading the like biggest books with the biggest font, and I felt so stupid. And I remember even inside the reading group, there'd be like four or five of us, and I was like the lowest of the low. Like I really couldn't read this horrible, massive book with massive font. And I felt like something was just so wrong with me, and at the same time, like, that same, like, strive for success was still on, and I didn't wanna, like, reach out and get support. So I remember we'd have, like, an hour, 30 minutes to read every day in school during, like, reading time, and I would just sit there and, like, stare at the pages. Like, reading was extremely hard. Um, it was very taxing on my mind, so I, didn't wanna do it. And I literally could not read the words on the page. I could read the simple words, maybe like and it and but when it came to other words, I literally did not even know where to start with depicting, how they sound or what it means and stuff like that. And so it wasn't until 5th grade. It was literally my first day of 5th grade. I can't believe I remember. I like literally remember this day. My mom had sat me down. I think we were at the kitchen table to do homework, and she I think I started crying. It was just so stressful. I was, 5th grade, you're like the big kids in the school, and I was so stressed about that. I was like, I can't do this. And I literally like could not answer the questions on the homework assignment. And so she was like trying to break it down. She's like, okay, read the directions on the page. What do the directions say? And I'm like, Mom, I like literally can't read it. Like I literally have no idea what that says. It was like trying to read like gibberish. And so that was, I mean, the start of like a whole adventure. I got tested for dyslexia. I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I started to get special accommodations in school. But a big part of that was I started getting tutored for dyslexia. There's this special method of teaching dyslexic people. It's called Orton Gillingham. And so I would do, I think it was like 3 days a week, 3 days a week, I think on most weeks. I got tutored in Orton Gillingham and I completed the entire program, and I learned how to read. I literally learned how to read in 5th grade.
Good for you. Good for you. And I know that's hard because I've heard that a lot of times. I can't say I know what you went through because, of course, I didn't have dyslexia, but I've heard other people say it in a couple different. Well, some are just it's a concentration thing; they just can't concentrate and sit there and read it. Some people, some letters look backwards to them, and to other people. Some people it doesn't. The letters are all over the place. Just, like you said, it looks like gibberish, and you
Mhm.
just don't understand what it says there. And so I understand, and I have people that I know that are going through that now, and that went through it too. And I know with my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was in school, she was having some issues too, and we found out that some of it was more of a concentration thing because most people, if there's a teacher up at the front room talking, and you're in a classroom with a bunch of people around you, you can sort of listen to what the teacher's saying and sort of not hear the people around you. You sort of take them out of your whole function there and center your whole hearing to that teacher. She had trouble doing that because even though she's trying to listen to the teacher, anybody around her talking, she couldn't cancel that out.
Wow.
And that was her issue. When we found that out, we found a way that she could fix that, which was with a headpiece she could put on. There was like it was like headphones, just pushing like little earbuds in,
Yeah.
and then the teacher had a little microphone on her, and when she talked, she could hear that, and she's canceling out everybody else. So there's different
Yeah.
ways. So um, so you're in 5th grade. You're now. You say you learned to read through 5th grade, and like you said, you're the higher school. I don't know if that's the same school as here, where when I grew up, it's different now. But when I grew up to grade 5 was like public school, and then you had like a junior high from 6, 7, 8, and then you went to high school. I don't know if that's the same way you were, like the top of that.
Yeah, that's about the same. So in in Georgia where I grew up, it was, 5th grade was elementary school, 6th, 7th, and 8th was middle school, and then 9th through 12th was high school. And I was set to go to the same public school with all of my friends. And very, very close friends that I stayed in touch with through the end of high school. But my older brother had gone to the public school, and he's very smart. And he did well there, but my parents really worried that I would struggle there. You had to it was more independence, and I was struggling academically, and so they sent me to a private school where I knew literally nobody, and it was kind of like a fresh start.
Yeah, and um, so fresh start in the way like this private school, was it more centered to um people that had issues with learning, or was it just a private school that people just paid and just went? They just didn't want to go to public school.
I'm trying to think like what appealed to it for my parents. There was a couple, at least there was one school in the area that was specifically for dyslexic kids.
Mhm.
But I think my parents felt like, and that's a good question. I'm kind of curious to ask them, but I think they felt like because I was getting tutored, I didn't necessarily need a dyslexic school. But I think they wanted me to have like more teacher attention, smaller classes, that kind of thing, a place where they could accommodate a little bit more to me. And so I think that's why they picked this private school opposed to the public school that was kind of like fend for yourself, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because, like I said, you didn't have to go to a school like that. If you have a school that's smaller classrooms, more attention to you, it would help you out. Because now that you can read, now you can do a lot more stuff. So, well, now you're in middle school. How did your schooling go then? Did things improve now that you were helped with your dyslexia a little bit?
So that's a really interesting question. So I went to um so after elementary school, I went to this private school for 1 year, and then I switched over to for seventh and eighth grade. I went to the school that I went to for high school. It's kind of weird. They have like seventh and eighth grade, and then they have high school.
Mhm.
But there was kind of this weird year-long gap that I went to this other random school for. But middle school and high school were extremely difficult. It's interesting. I My college and grad school GPAs were much higher than my high school GPA. Especially the school that I went to for seventh and eighth grade in high school. They were, they call themselves like a college prep school. And I think I've only taken maybe two classes since leaving there that were harder
Mhm.
than that school. It was just extremely difficult. Um, these really like high achieving classes. I took all of the easy classes and I still really struggled. I just remember like staying up for hours and hours every night. I'd come home from band practice. I'd go to school all day. I'd come home from band practice. I'd have 4 hours of homework to do, and then rinse and repeat, do it all again tomorrow. I just remember being so stressed, so run thin. I mean, honestly, those were probably the most like challenging years of my life. And people that say, "Oh, I'd go back to high school," I'm like, I would never do that. Like, it was absolutely horrible.
Yeah. No, and I know I hear a lot of people like that. Like I lucked out because I was in music and stuff like that. I was a drummer back then, and I was in a lot of music classes. So I didn't have, other than your normal English and math and science that you had to take, the rest of my like 4 of the 8 classes of the year were for me were all arts type classes. So it was a lot
Mhm.
easier. Now, like you said in high school, do you feel that was it more that the work was harder and you were struggling, and or was it more also a social aspect too? Because if you're going to school all day long and then you got to go home do 4 hours of homework, you're not really having time to hang out with friends and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
did that play into it a bit, or was it just more that you were just struggling because the schoolwork itself was just really hard?
I think it was a mix of both. I think I was really struggling academically, and the school that I went to was, I mean, to be not only to be cool, but to have like any friends, you had to be a cheerleader or a cross country member or a football player. You had to be highly athletic, the best on the team, that kind of thing. And so I had a pretty like core group of friends in marching band. I was in color guard. That's the flags, but I had, my marching band friends, but besides that, I really did not have a lot of friends. And a lot of my friends were in different grades than myself. So I wouldn't see them most of the day. I'd only see them like, for marching band at the end of the day. But I mean, just the kids were so mean. I don't know if bullied is the right word, but I remember this one experience very vividly where I was sitting in a class trying to make small talk with the girls who were sitting next to me, the cool girls. And I started talking, jumped into the conversation, and they literally just ignored me like I didn't exist.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember just being like, what is going on? Like, this is so bizarre. So like I said, I don't know if I call it bullying, but I definitely like wasn't cool. I almost kind of felt like I was like walking around with this like marching band, like black plague, like, oh, don't touch her, like she's in marching band, she's a loser, that kind of thing.
which of course is not true, but of course I could see where you perceive that because like I I find in the States there's a lot of different things than we went through here in Canada because we didn't have a lot of that kind of stuff because here hockey is big, baseball's big. Over there, it's not just baseball, but football's big for you guys. So the marching
Yeah.
band, I'm sure you were using with the football team and stuff, but you're not on the football team, you're not the cheerleader, you're just in the marching band that they see in between. And like you said, they look down at you, which is not right, but I'm sure there's a lot of other kids that went through the same thing. So how did you handle all that? Because what was your weekends like? I mean, because you're not, do you have a lot of homework on the weekends, or were you able to at least unwind a bit more on the weekends?
Yeah,
Or
that's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I think I definitely had a lot of homework to catch up on, projects, big papers on the weekends. I'm sure I hung out with some of my friends from marching band. I remember once I got a car, it was nice to be able to drive over to my, marching band friends' houses, stuff like that. I started dating around what grade was that? Probably like 10th grade. And it was nice to, have somebody, who I could, relate with and hang out with them and
sure,
stuff like that.
around
Um,
14, 15 years old in that area?
yeah, yeah, but I don't really remember hanging out too much with people.
Mhm.
I just remember having like a very, very small circle.
Yeah. So I'm sure with the way school's going itself, when it comes to the academic part, you're struggling as it is. And then on the other side, you got what to me sounds like almost that movie Mean Girls with all the mean girls. Their popular girls are always talking down to everybody else. So you got all these other people that you said it's not really bullying, but they're not paying attention to you. And so it sounds like there's probably a lot of anxiety there and going through a lot of depression at that time. Does that help
Yeah.
maybe affect your schoolwork there too?
I mean, definitely. I remember it was probably again, probably around 10th grade. Um, I mean, I was extremely depressed. I told my parents, I need to go see a doctor. I need to get on meds. Like I'm not okay. And around that time too, I had started self-harming. I had a full-blown eating disorder. I mean, I was just an utter mess. I remember just like looking myself in the mirror and being like, I don't like who you are, but like I don't know how to like change this. Like I was just in this like horrible cycle of like waking up and going to school and being in a nightmare and not understanding classes and feeling really shitty about myself and then just, self-harming and people being mean and, acting out with my eating disorder. It was just this whole cycle that I didn't know how to get out of. And thankfully I did get on medication and I started seeing a therapist. Who I still am in contact with today. Really, I mean, she changed my life. I call her like my go girl. Like she's just always been like so supportive of me. Um, but it was just, I mean, it was just a really challenging period of time. I think this like, trying to like understand myself and like, trying to like be an adult, but I'm still a kid and I live under my parents' roof. Like it's just such a weird time in somebody, at least in my, it was, speaking for myself in my time in my life, it was just such a weird time, and I am really glad I've passed it.
Glad, and you're not alone on that because I know a lot of children, and I went through it too at that time. You're between that age, I guess, or grade, I guess, of 9 to 12 in that high school year, you're going through so much because you're trying to get good grades because you want to be able to go to college, university, whatever, and people are pushing on you, your teachers, your parents, everything, like, get good grades, get good grades. You're trying to have a nice social life because you don't want to be an outcast either, and you're trying to make everybody happy. You're not happy with yourself, and I think a lot of us went through that in high school and still to this day go through it. I think down back then it was a lot harder too because especially when I mean, I was in school probably 20 years before you and that. And back then in the 80s, when I was going through high school in the 80s with junior high and high school, mental health you didn't talk about. If you said anything about your feeling struggling or mental health, you were going to a hospital because that back then you don't talk about it, especially if you're a man. And I don't mean to say that to be sexist or anything, but back
Yeah,
then men are supposed to be strong and they're supposed to be this, and it was a totally different mindset back then. So back then you didn't talk about your mental health things and you didn't really have anybody to talk to. Now at home, whereas were you able to talk to anybody at home, whether it be your parents or even your brother, your older brother, your younger brother? Because he's a couple years older than you, or about a year older than you, I guess.
Yeah.
He probably went through some stuff. Was he more of a popular kid? Could he have help you out a little bit, or?
I'm laughing because he was in marching band with me. We were both
Oh,
losers. So I will say, my parents did their absolute best. My dad coached every sport we were in, and my mom showed up to every meet. And, I know they love us. And at the same time, like, they did not support me the way that I needed to be supported. I remember in, I think it was 10th or 11th grade, one of my friends attempted suicide, and I was just a wreck. Um, Part of it was like kind of blamed on me, and I just felt horrible about myself, and I needed someone to talk to about that. And I don't even know if my parents knew about it. I mean, I assume they know. It was a very big deal. This girl like transferred schools, but it just wasn't talked about. Like it was just kind of
mhm,
like everything was pushed under the rug. Again, I think that like strive for success was still on, where I didn't want to talk to my parents about my problems. I wanted to like, solve my problems on my own and not disappoint them.
mhm.
Um my older brother, he like I said, he was in marching band. Um it's interesting. Like we were close in proximity. We were both in marching band together, but I don't think we started talking about, our issues and stuff until, probably the past, 4 or 5 years. But
Mhm.
it was kind of the way I took it in our house. It was like, go upstairs to your room and like solve your problems on your own. That was kind of the
Yeah.
message that I was told. It was never said, but that's kind of what all of us did. We'd come home from school, empty our lunch boxes, and go up to our room and, do our homework and, do all our stuff by ourselves.
Yeah. And it's too bad that back then you guys didn't talk more about it, because it sounds like he went through a lot of the same stuff you did. And maybe if you both knew at the time that both of you were going through that, you could have worked through it together.
Yeah.
And now you talked about your friend who attempted suicide and everything, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but did that
Yeah.
ever come across your mind with yourself when you were saying you were self-harming? In that, did that ever
Yeah.
cross your mind?
I think probably like very like fleeting thoughts. Like I never had, a plan of like how I would kill myself. I think I definitely like wanted to go to sleep and not wake up, that kind of thing. Um, I'm definitely like very grateful that it never, got quite as bad as her. And at the same time, I was definitely at my own kind of low.
Hmm. No, and we're glad that you didn't go that way. Also,
Thanks, Sean.
you wouldn't be here. Um, so now, with all that going on, how did that affect you away from school? Because I'm sure now you're depressed, and this is probably when you started experimenting with other stuff.
Yeah, so this was right around the beginning of college. I started dating someone, and we moved super fast. From like the night we met, we never spent a night apart. Super codependent, which again, like just looking at all of these like behaviors, like it was self-harm, eating disorders, codependency, like I just did not know how to cope properly. So, anyways, we wound up moving in together pretty fast, and we got a dog. And I mean, looking back, like I have a lot of love for that relationship. And at the same time, I see how absolutely toxic it was. But I was on vacation with my family, and, we had an apartment and a dog and all the stuff. And I mean, we talked about marriage and stuff. We were still young. I think I was around 22 at this time. But I came home from vacation, and like they had moved out. Everything was gone. Like my stuff was there, but like everything else was missing. And I remember I had a lot of the bedroom furniture, and they had a lot of the like living room furniture, and like there was no couch, there was no TV. It was just super bizarre. And they came over to my parents' house, gave me about a 15-minute explanation, and then it was like, you're on your own.
Hmm.
And I mean, my whole world, came crashing down. My whole life revolved around this person. And I just remember feeling so helpless. And I remember a lot of my friends really reaching out and attempting to support me. Um, But unfortunately, one of my friends who was reaching out to me, who was literally just trying to help me. She introduced me to marijuana, and I had smoked marijuana a couple times. I remember one time I bought it from a friend in high school and thought I was so bad, and we hid it in my parents' basement. And I don't know, I've looked for it. I don't know where it went. But it really wasn't until I was, after this relationship ended, it was a full blown. I mean, I remember smoking. Um, I remember smoking that night shortly after the breakup. And I think it was like the next day that I was like, where do I buy this? Like, this is the best thing I've ever experienced in my life.
It was a release for you.
It would, I mean, I just
Wow.
remember, I remember it solved like all of my problems. It was like every horrible thought I've had about myself, all my self hatred, all my fear of going on, life alone. Um, I mean, it was just that it made everything better. And so that was really the start of my marijuana addiction.
And it's funny, just listening to what you were saying there, it it sparked a little question there because one of the statements you said there was it solved all your problems. So I think what people don't realize is it solved your problems at the time, just mentally. It solved,
Yes.
and I know what you're getting at, but I
Yes.
just wanted people to
Yes.
know, like, it's just sometimes when people say certain things, it gets construed different ways, and I construe it as when you say it solved many things.
Yeah.
To me, it was more like it just you didn't have to deal with that stuff when you
Yeah.
were smoking that. You're like, you know what? I feel good. I feel good about myself. This stuff's awesome. And
Mhm.
where do I get more? Because at that time, you were going through so much mentally, physically.
Mhm.
I'm just sure you're just not knowing where to turn to. And then all of a sudden, boom, this is like the
Yeah.
miracle drug for you.
And it's funny, I've had that conversation many times with clients because I'm like, that's where my brain was like there too. Yeah, this solves all my problems. But the reality is, you stop smoking it for an hour and all your problems are back. So
Yeah,
does it really solve all your problems or does it just mask your problems?
exactly. That's what I was kind of getting at. It's more of a masking, and not that you didn't know that, but I just, for the people listening there, it's what it sounded to me. Is
Yeah.
it masked it for a while, but then marijuana wasn't the only thing you were doing. I think you had a little bit of liquid help there too.
Yes. Yeah. So when I couldn't find marijuana for whatever reason, uh, I would drink and I would drink alcoholically. I remember looking at the clock and it being, noon and thinking, "Oh, we made it halfway through the day. It's okay to drink now." And I remember, drinking a lot. I knew it wasn't normal, and at the same time, again, it's solving my problems. I know that it made me feel better.
Mhm.
That kind of like self-medication. So there was this whole cycle with the marijuana and then alcohol when I didn't have marijuana. Um, and it quickly, quickly spiraled very out of control.
Yeah. So did you said this happened in your early 20s, but did this start before like the alcohol itself in high school itself, or you were already out of high school, you're in college, university?
I I definitely dabbled with marijuana and alcohol in high school. Um, I remember
To me, it was
taking
more like school type dabbling. It's not like a problem at that time.
no, I remember one time I got so drunk on a cruise with my friends and I was like, "I will never drink again."
We all say that.
Yeah, but it really wasn't until this relationship ended. I do remember though smoking marijuana one time before that relationship had ended, and I was like, "Oh, I really like this stuff." But for some reason, I didn't get into it then. It was, after the breakup where, the can of worms was opened.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like you said, you needed that release. Um, and with the alcohol, was it somebody introduced that to you too, or did you just try that yourself when one day you just didn't have any marijuana and you're like, oh, I need to feel better, and you just happen to have some in the house, or
Yeah. I remember like one day in particular where I didn't have any marijuana and I was like, I need something. Like I'm going to lose my mind. And that's really how bad it got. It was like my mind literally thought about smoking marijuana all day. My life was totally consumed with it. That was all I did when I got home. I would say wake and bake all day long. I'd wake up, hit my bong, smoke the entire day, um, set it up for the next morning so it'd be all ready. All the marijuana was grinded. I mean, it was ridiculous. But the alcohol was definitely there when I could not get my hands on weed for whatever reason.
Mhm. Yeah, and the only reason I asked is because you're saying you're probably around early 20s at this time. So
Mhm.
you're probably you're still in college or university at this time, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Does this affect your schooling?
It's very interesting. I did very well in undergrad, grade wise, but I skipped a lot of classes. You really kind of scooted by. I really did get good grades, but I'm kind of horrified. There's this line in the AA book, and it says, "We think men of genius do our best work when drunk." And that's how I felt. I thought I did my
Mhm.
best work when I was high. And so I
Yep.
was like, oh, I got to smoke, to write this paper. And I'm kind of horrified to think about what I turned in. I mean, it could not have been extremely coherent. I mean, honestly, though, I got pretty good grades. So it must have not been, horrible, horrible. But I'm sure there were parts of it that didn't make any sense.
They probably just thought you were being creative or something like that. Your creative mind was going.
Yes, yes.
And it's funny how you say that because I know a lot of people, especially if they're on weed, they think that it actually helps them because it calms them down, it makes them more alert and that. But a lot of people don't realize, just like alcohol, it does affect your motor motorization of your limbs and everything and your skills and slow it does slow you down. But even driving, people think, oh, I'm a better driver when I do it, but they don't realize that
Yeah,
it might take them that extra second or two to hit the brake or to do this and that.
right.
And not everybody's that way. I'm not going to categorize everybody. Some people, they do have
Yeah.
to take it because of medical reasons. They
Hmm.
do. They need to
Yeah.
take it if they're on medical reasons for it. And I understand
Yeah.
that, or PTSD and things like that. It does help them. And I'm glad we have it for
Hmm.
stuff like that.
Absolutely.
But when you're doing it on a recreational thing like you were doing, it gets a little out of hand. And that's why I was wondering with the schooling, because sometimes that can affect your schooling and
Yeah.
not showing up for class because you're late because you oversleep or this or that. Or did you ever
Yeah.
have any of those times where you just didn't make it to class because of the night before? Or
I don't know about not well, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I skipped so many classes in college. I figured out which teachers took attendance, which ones didn't. Um, and I was more of a like do the research at home to complete these assignments, that kind of thing. Or so I skipped so many classes to begin with. Now I do remember going to class high, several times and just sitting there, probably like drooling or something, not knowing what's going on. Which I'm horrified about. The other thing I will say is during this time I was studying to be a teacher, an elementary school teacher, and I was doing what they call student teaching. I was going into the school and being a teacher, teaching for somebody else's class and getting feedback, from that, the actual teacher on how I could improve, stuff like that. And I will say, I something I am very proud of is that I never went to student teaching high, which I'm very grateful for. I would smoke, up until midnight, take a shower, wash my hair so I didn't smell like weed. And it was definitely the first thing I did the second I got home. Um, but I know a lot of people in their addiction, they kind of put their morals to the side. And I think I would have gotten to that point if I had not have, gotten clean and sober. But it's just scary to think about how close I came to putting other people, other children in harm's way.
definitely. And then thinking of you, you're saying how you would go to class high or maybe even drunk still, like not even sobered up yet. Did
Mhm.
anybody recognize it? Did anybody say anything to you? Did anybody like, listen, if you're gonna, you got to clean yourself up? Like, did
Yeah.
this anybody at the school notice?
I wouldn't say at the school necessarily. Um, I mean, honestly, I think I'd brag about it to the people I was sitting next to, like, "Oh, I'm high right now," which is literally so stupid. But it was more a problem with my roommates. I was in a sorority in college. It's a service sorority. We just do a lot of service, and do, hang out with our sisters and stuff like that. But I lived with two of my sorority sisters. And I remember one of them, I mean, she was like my best friend at the time. She said to me, she said, "I cannot wait till the day our lease ends so I never have to see you again." And I and,
Wow.
and I remember my reaction was like, "Why can't you be happy for me? Like I'm finally okay. Like what's wrong with you?" But I mean, I was mean, I was selfish. The only thing I cared about was getting high. I mean, we were living in this 3-bedroom apartment and I was sitting in bed smoking a bong. I mean, our apartment reeked of weed. They didn't do it. I was just, really selfish. I was bringing, you know, people over that they didn't trust and I didn't care. They had marijuana. Come on over.
Yeah. And so, um, did this carry on past grad school and things like that?
So it was um it was literally my last semester of college, the first day, um, that I went into treatment. It was, going into going into the new year for 2020. We had this massive apartment, this massive party at our 3-bedroom apartment that I was telling you about. We had probably like 20 or 30 people over. Like it was a very big party. There was a lot of alcohol. I remember priding myself in that I had bought enough weed for everybody in this party. Um, sound like the biggest stoner, but I smoked so much marijuana that day. I smoked probably 8 bowls from my bong. I had smoked several joints, several blunts. Um, and I wound up having a drug induced manic episode with psychosis. So, what that looked like was I was having extremely grandiose thoughts. I wasn't sleeping. I had so much energy. I was trying to save the world. I had this whole delusional plan of how we were going to save mankind. Honestly, it was all pretty good stuff, but like it was insane. And one of my friends called my parents, and my parents called my therapist, and long story short, on January 6th of 2020, I was locked up in the mental hospital. And then I went to treatment for about 24 days, inpatient treatment. I convinced my parents it was not a good place and they let me leave. And I came home and my diseased mind was telling me marijuana is your problem, but you can drink. And so that's, a really big part of my story where the drinking really took off. I drank really heavily for a couple weeks until my parents made me go back to treatment again. And that's where I got sober. I it's called intensive outpatient. It was 3 days a week for 3 hours a day. I had to go to AA. I had to get a sponsor. I had to start working the steps. Um, and honestly, I was, young, still having a good time, hadn't faced a lot of the negative consequences. There was no DWI, there was no, losing my kids, anything like that. I was very in denial of how bad it was, and my plan was to complete that program and get high and drunk the day that I left. But like I said, I went to AA and I got a sponsor, and my sponsor, who was basically a stranger to me, sat down with me for hours upon hours every week. And I remember calling her. Um, I was probably about 40, 50, 60 days into the program. And I remember telling her, I feel really happy right now. This is really weird. And she was like, "No, that's good. You're supposed to feel happy." And I just continued doing what she told me to do. And, a lot of my problems solved themselves through the 12 steps. And I realized, I was building this life that I loved. I was able to look myself in the mirror and like the person that I was. And I didn't want to go back to the drugs and alcohol. And so my sobriety date from when I stopped smoking and drinking is February 17th, 2020, which is also my older brother's birthday.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday present
Ironically,
to your brother.
yes, ironically, but that was really like the start of a new chapter in my life, a start of living my life for myself. You know, not self-harming, not, using addiction, not having an eating disorder, not being codependent. It was kind of, gave me an answer, AA and the 12 steps kind of gave me an answer to all my problems in life. And I'm just really grateful for that.
No, we all are grateful for that. And one of my best friends, he's a photographer himself in this area. He's 65, 66 years old now. And he actually was this like you, like he was an alcoholic himself. And he was actually our second episode of Butler's Babble.
Oh,
And he talks about AA. It was the best thing he did too, and 12 steps and things like that.
yeah.
Now, um, and one thing I like our guests to know is this is going to be an ongoing thing for you because this is just not something you can just turn off. It's something you're going to be
Right.
dealing with probably for the rest of your life. And I'm
Yeah.
proud of the way you've been dealing with it. I think that's awesome. You do have your therapist, you said, but your sponsor, are you still in contact with that same sponsor
Yeah.
or?
So, I'm more friends with that sponsor now, but I've since moved and gotten a new sponsor. But I still do have a sponsor. I am currently reworking the steps. Um, I sponsor other women. I do a lot for my own recovery.
Mhm.
Um, when I'm doing those sorts of things for my recovery, when I'm attending meetings regularly, I just feel better on the inside. So that's really why I keep doing that.
Good. No, I'm glad. Because it's not an easy thing and it's not going to be something that's just easy to overcome. And I'm glad that you're continuing with it because you look amazing. When you and I always talk, you always have this spunk to you. So, um, I have a feeling that by now, if you didn't finish that, that's like 4 years ago, I guess, just over 4 years now, 4.5 years ago. And who knows where you'd be now if you didn't stop.
I
So,
know, I know.
um,
Yeah, it's honestly a nightmare to think about, that day, January 6th, where I got locked up in the mental hospital. I thought it was the worst day of my life. I mean, it was pretty awful. I mean, it was not, a desirable place to be. But I'm really, really grateful for my one friend in particular who called my parents. I was very, very mad at the time.
mhm,
But that was really the catalyst for getting me better. And I'm,
it was the
really
turning
grateful
point
to,
for sure.
yeah, I'm really grateful to have gotten some help that I really needed.
No, and exactly, and that's sometimes what it is because people sometimes don't realize they need the help, or they don't think, oh, I don't have a problem. It's just I can stop whenever I want, type of thing. I
Yeah.
just don't want to, and sometimes you need that little push or that little kick in the butt to get
Well,
you
I
to go
think,
there.
and I think a lot of what it was for me was I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I knew this was out of control. I had tried so many times to stop on my own. I had made all these plans about you're not going to smoke today, you're going to smoke tomorrow, and you're only going to smoke on Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday, all these random days and whatever. And I could not follow through with anything. I mean, it was like I had to be high at all times. So I'm glad that I say that, my higher power gave me the help that I was unable to ask for by giving me this manic episode that led me to the mental hospital.
No, definitely. And now going back a little bit there, with all that happening before that January, how did this affect family life? Because you're not living at home, you're living with two roommates at college right now, university. Did your parents or your siblings that and your sister that did they know all this was going on or how bad it was, or did they just think, oh, you're just a college kid partying and it's not a big deal? Or did they know something, they just didn't know how to say it, or?
I think at first it wasn't a big deal. Like I don't think at first my parents or my siblings realized how bad it was. I remember my parents came up for dinner or something one day and I had just smoked marijuana and I was high and I think they were really confused why I needed to smoke weed to have dinner with them. Um, you know, they could have said whatever they wanted to say. I wasn't going to stop because I couldn't stop.
Mhm.
It was just this like vicious cycle of like I knew it was so bad for me, but like no matter how much I wanted to stop, it like to tell you I couldn't stop. Like I don't even know how to like express that, even greater. I mean, it was like impulsive. Like it was like my hand, I would be looking at the marijuana and I'd be like, don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it. And my hand would reach out and grab it. It was impossible to stop.
Yeah. And um so yeah, okay. Yeah, you went through this, you've gone through the program, you're doing much better now. Tell us a little bit about current Danny.
Yeah.
What's because now you're into social work.
Yeah. So I graduated with my undergrad degree in elementary education, and I was a teacher for a very short minute there. I taught for 6 months, and my hat's off to anyone who's a teacher. It's a very, very hard job, very fulfilling, but very, very hard. But I knew for a long time I really wanted to be a therapist from when from what all that my therapist did for me, I really wanted to give that back to other people. And I think my plan all along was to go back and get my master's in social work. You didn't necessarily need a undergraduate social work degree, so I knew I could do this education thing and then go back and get my master's in social work. And so, anyways, that's what I did. I got my master's in social work from the University of Georgia. I never thought I would work in the substance abuse field or population. I, thought more like mental health, but with my own addiction and, working in treatment centers as a tech and stuff like that, I mean, it just felt completely right. Today I work as a substance abuse therapist. I graduated about a year ago and I've been doing this for a little over a year now. But I mean, I just love working with other addicts and alcoholics. I say like they're like my people. Like I get them. I get what
Mhm.
it's like to be um, you know, so helpless. I get what it's like to be destroying your life and not being able to stop. I really love working with this population and I feel very grateful that people trust me to help them when they're in such a vulnerable time in their life.
No, definitely, and you would be a perfect person for that. Knowing that what you went through, hopefully they look at it that way and say like, "Well, you've been through this. I'm going to listen to you," as opposed to, "You're totally different in your story, and you don't know what I'm going through and things like that." So hopefully they look at it, and I'm sure you're helping them quite a bit. Um, so you're looking at opening up your own practice, I take it, in the future, or
Yeah, so I currently work for my supervisor's private practice. So I do that on the side. The plan is once I have my full licensure, right now I have an associate's licensure, but it takes a couple of years to get your full licensure. Once I have that, my plan is to do open up my own private practice with my business. Um, I don't know. I think I'll eventually do that full time, but I don't think I'm ready to completely leave the substance abuse treatment center world quite yet.
no, definitely, and but I mean, you're still helping people not only in the way you were doing just talking about, but also, like we told people at the beginning of the program, you run your own podcast too,
Yeah.
doing similar type of podcast as mine, which is great. And I was thankful to be on your show. Why don't you tell them a little bit about illuminating you?
Yes. So I started the podcast at the beginning of 2024. That was my when my first episode released. And the months leading up to that, I had been having some thoughts about like really fulfilling my purpose and stuff like that. I felt like I was helping a couple people on a really great scale, seeing a couple people really transform their lives. And I wanted to see a greater amount of people be able to transform their lives. So I started my podcast, Illuminating You, and my guests come on and they share a story, whether it's, their life story or an event that happened, and how they overcame it and how they remain resilient, and any words of wisdom that they can share for somebody facing a similar situation. Um, it's been amazing. It's been so nice to meet people, including you, John, through the podcast. I didn't know there was this entire podcasting community. It's been so, so cool. I a couple episodes to throw out there to recommend. Episode 2, my friend Jeremy Shore shares his story of overcoming addiction. He was a really hardcore alcoholic, and it's been amazing to hear him share his story. Episode 15, my guest Jackie James shares her story, and her son died by suicide in 2013 when he was very, very young. And she really advocates for helping, you know, he was bullied very badly, and she advocates for helping people be a little bit kinder. And another episode to look out for is John, your episode. It's episode 6. You share your story about your car accident, which is insane. and your wife. And I mean, it was awesome having you on the show. And every episode is a little bit different. I've got I think my next episode to be released is about a lady who's struggling with infertility. Um, I've got cancer survivors, just a whole different, um, lots of different topics on the show.
No, definitely. And I still remember your very first episode too. I believe her name was Paula. And
Paola,
if I'm
yeah.
not mistaken, she was an ex-schoolmate of yours or something, or a
Yes.
friend of yours or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And and I love the way you interview them too, because you get their vulnerability, like you said, and they're willing to share their stories. And between all my podcast episodes and all yours, if you add them all together, you got like 40, 50 people there that just are everyday normal people like us that just want to share their stories to help other people. And I think that's
Yeah.
great. I think having you out there doing that is amazing, because you do a really good job at it. I hope people go in and listen to it over at the Society of Authentic Living, I believe is your website. Is
Yes.
it Society of authenticliving.com?
That is correct, John. Societyofauthenticliving.com.
Perfect. Oh, tongue twister for me. And you have a Facebook page too, which I'm actually looking at right now.
Yes.
And Bill, you're doing a lot, like you're almost up there with me. You've got like 18, 19. I'm at 20. Your number, I think
Yeah.
26 for me now. So I mean,
Yeah.
um, what's new in your future that you're thinking of? Give us a little insight of what you're thinking of, maybe future wise.
Yeah, I think future wise, I think my relationship with my boyfriend is gonna turn a little bit more serious, if you know what I mean. I love him. I love him dearly. I think continuing to work in the substance use field, I'd love to be a clinical director at a treatment center when I get my full licensure. Continuing to grow my private practice that I've currently have, continuing with the podcast. Continuing with my AA meetings, all of those sorts of things. Eventually would love to buy a house. It's a little challenging in today's market.
Yeah.
But kind of buy a house, settle down. Um, I'd have some kids eventually and have a lot of animals.
A lot of animals.
Yes.
Well, kids can be kind of animals too sometimes.
Right.
Um, but no, I see nothing but good things for you in the future. You're such an amazing person, and I know I appreciate you coming on here and being as vulnerable as you've been, and expressing a lot of, because I know you don't go on and talk a lot on stuff like this about your own personal life, because you're more on my side of the screen where you're talking to other people about their side. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you'll get out there and do this a little bit more with other people too, because sometimes I think it's a healing process for you too, because for you to be able to talk about it and get it out there, I think it helps you a little
Yeah.
bit. So I know I'm appreciative that you're, and honored that you would come on here and share your story with us.
Yeah.
Um, Before we go though, why I always like to end my program with last minute words of wisdom that you can give to our last words that you'd like to say to anybody out there that's listening to this podcast. Give us some little words of wisdom from Dani.
Yeah. My words of wisdom is ask for help. You don't have to be as bad off as I was to, get help thrown in your lap. If you need help, you probably know it. And there's so many resources out there, whether it's a therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, coach, which, has become really big these days, any sort of energy healing. There's so many different modalities to gain treatment. Um, so reach out, get help. You don't have to do this alone. Going through life alone is really hard, really sad. So reach out, get help. You deserve it. So um, yeah, get help.
No, I think those are great words to live by and great way to end this podcast. And if you're interested in getting a hold of Dani, I'm sure you can get her through the Society of Authentic Living.com. Just reach out to her, even if you just want to say hi to her and tell her how much you love this program. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. And if you have anything, if you're going through any similar stuff that she went through, I'm sure she would love to talk to you and help you out any way that she can. But I thank you again for coming on here and sharing your story with us. And I hope you'll be willing to come back again in the future. We'll get a little tune up of what you're going through and things like that. And I'm hoping maybe around episodes 30, 35, once I've got a whole bunch in, I want to go to some past episodes and bring some of those people back on and just get some updates on everybody, do like a little reunion show. So hopefully
Oh, I
you'll be
love
willing to
that.
come on to that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you, John, for providing the space for me to share my story and hopefully help somebody with it.
Definitely, I'm sure it will. And for all of you out there, make sure you go out, subscribe to this, subscribe to the audio channel, and share this with all your family and friends, because all these stories that we share on here are ones that we want to get out there so that we can help other people that are struggling with some of the same situations that our guests struggle through. And maybe we can find another way to help them through that. So until next time, I hope you find this empowering. I hope you get motivated and inspired to live the best life that you can. And remember, if anybody asks, say the butler did it.